Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Hope you have a relaxing and comfortable time with Stories for Happy Life channel. It started with a single email. Subject line, invitation to join our national dialogue on diversity in tech. Mason Ellis, founder and CEO of Cygnus Core Technologies, stared at the message from the producers of The National Current, a top-rated syndicated morning show. They wanted him to appear on their next episode, focusing on Black excellence in business. It was positioned as a tribute, an opportunity to highlight trailblazers. But Mason had been in the game long enough to know better. He leaned back in his sleek black leather office chair, the San Francisco skyline glittering behind him. His company, Cygnus Core, had just landed a $150 million cybersecurity contract with the Department of Energy, beating out legacy corporations that had dominated government contracts for decades. It wasn't just a win, it was a seismic shift. And now the media had come calling, again. His assistant, Trina, peeked through the glass wall of his office and tapped her watch. "They want an answer before 5, she said, stepping in. "You thinking about it?" Mason didn't respond right away. He had been featured in interviews before, some respectful, others less so. This one felt different. The subject line alone was a red flag. The phrase "national dialogue on diversity" sounded more like bait than praise. "I've seen how this goes," Mason said finally. "They don't want a conversation, they want a story. A black man who made it, with just enough bite to stir controversy, but not enough to make white audiences uncomfortable." Trina nodded, arms crossed. "They'll frame it like a celebration, but they're hoping you slip. Just enough to feed their balance." "They think we're lucky to be in the room," Mason muttered. "They never assume we built the room." Still, exposure on the National Current wasn't nothing. The audience was massive, millions of viewers across the country. And maybe, just maybe, he could use the platform to say something real. He sighed. "Let's do it." "You sure?" Mason nodded slowly. "But I'm not going in blind. I want every segment they've done on minority business owners. I want to know how they edit, what they cut, what they push." Trina smirked. "Already ahead of you." 2 days later, Mason walked into the broadcast studio in Midtown Manhattan. Everything was colder than he expected. The air, the staff, the way people greeted him like he was a checkmark on a schedule. The producer who met him was polite but rushed. "Thanks for being here, Mr. Ellis. They'll mic you up in 5. The segment is called Breaking Barriers, just so you're aware." Breaking barriers. Mason forced a smile. The implication was always the same. You're not supposed to be here, so let's celebrate the fact that somehow you are. As a makeup artist patted powder across his forehead, Mason watched the monitor above the mirror. A segment was just wrapping up. Something light about new wellness trends. A transition screen followed. Coming up next, the diversity advantage. Are Black entrepreneurs getting special treatment? Mason's eyes narrowed. So that was the real headline. They hadn't invited him to talk about innovation, leadership, or cybersecurity. They wanted to question his legitimacy. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and rolled his shoulders. Let them try. Mason Ellis hadn't spent 20 years clawing his way out of underfunded public schools and a system designed to count him out, just to be caught off guard by a camera and a smug host. He stepped onto the soundstage. The lights warmed. The cameras rolled. And as the music faded and the host greeted America, Mason took his seat across from her with a calm, unshakable focus. If this was the game, he was ready to flip the board. The stage was pristine, muted tones of navy and gold, sleek glass tables, and the subtle hum of lighting rigs overhead. Mason sat comfortably, his posture open, his suit sharp. Across from him, sitting with effortless poise, was Natalie Voss, the show's celebrated anchor. Ivy League credentials, nightly opinion segments, and a reputation for grilling with grace. Her smile was practiced, eyes too sharp to match the warmth in her voice. "Mason Ellis," she began, her voice silk on the surface. CEO of Cygnus Core Technologies, a man who went from a small-town Alabama high school to winning one of the largest tech contracts in federal history. Mason nodded politely. "Thanks for having me." Natalie leaned in slightly, her manicured fingers resting on her cue cards. "Let's start with the obvious. You're a success story. You've shattered ceilings, built a company from the ground up. You're what people mean when they talk about the American dream." Mason gave a faint smile. "Well, the dream takes a little more hustle when you're not born into it." Natalie chuckled, lightly. "Of course, but let's talk about that hustle, because some people are asking, did your background help you more than it hurt?" Mason tilted his head. "Come again?" She flipped to her next card. "Your company received support from federal programs designed to boost minority-owned businesses, correct? Grants, government incentives, priority bidding?" There it was, the real angle. Mason kept his expression neutral. Cygnus qualified for programs the same way any other company does, based on merit and compliance. But to be clear, we didn't win because of a checkbox. We won because our tech was the most secure, most scalable, and most innovative on the table. Natalie's smile didn't falter. "But wouldn't you agree that diversity programs give companies like yours an edge?" "I think," Mason replied evenly, "those programs exist because, for decades, companies like mine weren't even allowed in the room. Leveling the playing field isn't an edge, it's justice." A murmur stirred from somewhere off camera. One of the producers shifted in their seat. But Natalie wasn't done. She glanced at her notes. "You didn't go to Stanford. You weren't recruited by Google. You didn't intern at any of the Fortune 100s. Yet here you are, outbidding them." Mason raised an eyebrow. "I built encryption that beat their systems. That's why I'm here." "But don't you think some viewers might wonder," Natalie pressed, "how a man without the usual pedigree gets to the top of an industry this competitive?" Mason exhaled slowly. "You mean, how did I beat them without being one of them?" She blinked. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," he said calmly. The tension between them was subtle but thick. Mason wasn't hostile. He didn't need to be. His tone was even, his logic airtight. "I didn't go to Stanford," he continued, "because I didn't have parents who could afford a $70,000 a year education. I didn't intern at Google because I had to work tubes during college just to pay for books. But I taught myself to code before most of my peers even knew what Python was." Natalie crossed her legs, shifting to maintain composure. "I earned my seat at this table," he said, voice steady. "The only reason it's surprising is because the rules were never designed for someone like me to win." Silence stretched for a moment. Natalie cleared her throat. "Let's take a quick break," she said with a tight smile. "When we come back, more with Mason Ellis, including why he believes perception is the biggest barrier facing Black entrepreneurs today." As the lights dimmed for commercial, a stagehand approached Natalie with a new cue card. She took it without looking at Mason. But Mason didn't need to see the card to know what was coming next. They were about to go deeper. And he was ready. The moment the cameras rolled again, the energy on set shifted. Natalie Voss sat a little straighter now, the playful veneer replaced by a colder, more exacting tone. The audience sensed it too. Something sharp was coming. "We're back," she said with a poised smile. Still with us is Mason Ellis, founder of Cygnus Core Technologies and one of the most talked-about entrepreneurs in America. Mason nodded, sitting composed, hands folded in his lap. Natalie barely waited. "Let's talk perception," she said, her voice calm but loaded. "You've criticized major tech firms for their lack of diversity. You've spoken about bias in funding, but others say that narrative is tired, that the real issue isn't race, it's merit, that in today's economy, hard work speaks louder than anything else." Mason's eyes didn't leave hers. "Hard work?" he asked. "Let's define that." Natalie gestured lightly. "By all means. I worked 3 jobs to get through college. I coded my first firewall while sleeping in a warehouse. I pitched my company 32 times before a single investor took a meeting, and even then, they wanted me to bring in a white co-founder to add credibility. The audience inhaled collectively. But sure, Mason added, tell me again how hard work is colorblind. Natalie didn't blink. No one's denying your effort, Mason. But is it fair to say that media, and even corporate America, are eager to elevate Black success stories right now? That your story sells because of its contrast? He gave a dry laugh. So let me get this straight. For decades, we were invisible. And now when one of us succeeds, we're overexposed? Some critics say, she pressed, that the real problem is resentment. That calling out inequality is just a convenient excuse for those who don't make it. Mason leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Do I look like a man who didn't make it? Natalie opened her mouth, hesitated. See, he said, tone calm but cutting, this is the trick. You invite me here, build me up, then start poking holes in my legitimacy. You want me to justify every inch of success, like I cheated the system. He locked eyes with the camera. But we don't ask that of the legacy kids who walk into million-dollar seed rounds because their uncle plays golf with a VC. We don't question the founders who fail upward, bankrupt a company, then get hired again because their LinkedIn has the right schools listed. The audience had gone dead quiet. Even Natalie seemed unsure for a moment. But me? Mason continued. I have to explain how I got here, why I deserve to stay, and whether I'm the exception or the rule. Natalie straightened in her seat. But your success is proof the system isn't broken. No, Mason said simply. My success is proof I fought harder. That doesn't make the system fair, it makes me resilient. She tried one last pivot. Mason, you've been accused by some of being too aggressive, too political, that your tone pushes people away. He paused. You mean because I won't smile while being questioned, like I stole something? Natalie's expression tensed. You want polite? He asked. Be polite to us. You want grace? Give it when we fall. You want us to stop talking about bias? Then stop giving us reasons to. He looked back into the camera, this time not just speaking, but delivering. We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for equity. And if my voice shakes a few boardrooms along the way, then maybe they needed shaking. A beat passed. Natalie offered a faint smile, masking her discomfort. Let's take another quick break. The studio lights dimmed again. Mason sat back, calm as ever. He had just burned the script. And for the first time, Natalie had no idea what to say next. By the time Mason stepped out of the studio, his phone was already vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, mentions, push notifications from apps he didn't even remember installing. He didn't check them right away. He just walked, steady, unhurried, through the lobby of KNQ Studios, past a receptionist who now looked at him like he'd just walked off a movie set. Outside, Los Angeles buzzed as it always did. Traffic, sirens, people, but something had shifted. Back inside the building, producers scrambled behind closed doors. Natalie Voss sat in her dressing room, head in her hands. She hadn't lost control of an interview in years. But this wasn't just a misstep. This was a detonation. And the blast radius was still expanding. By lunch, clips of Mason's interview were everywhere. Darius Bell was a spark. Mason Ellis just lit the fuse. The wiretap daily. You felt that. You felt every word at Bell K-Tech Rising. Mason Ellis didn't just clap back. He taught a masterclass in staying cool under fire. Stacy Newsroom on the flip side, another so-called entrepreneur playing the victim on national TV. Enough already. At Free Market Sarfair, merit matters, not skin color. End of story. At Truthcaster 88, the country was split right down the middle. Cable news picked it up within hours. On MSNBC, a commentator praised Mason for naming what too many boardrooms pretend doesn't exist. On Fox, a panelist claimed he weaponized race to shame corporate America. The headlines kept rolling in. Mason Ellis dismantles systemic racism on live TV. The Atlantic. Is Mason Ellis America's next business activist? Forbes. Tech mogul or troublemaker? The Wall Street Post. Even late-night shows couldn't resist. On the Danny Mercer show, the host played a clip of Mason saying, "Do I look like a man who didn't make it?" Danny smirked and added, "No, sir. You look like the man who just made half the country uncomfortable and the other half ready to elect you." Mason watched none of it. Instead, he sat in his apartment, lights off, watching the city flicker below his windows. His assistant, Jordan, paced behind him. "Your inbox is a war zone," Jordan said, half laughing, half concerned. "Investors are split. Some pulled out. Others want to throw in more than we asked for." Mason didn't respond. Jordan kept going. "You just landed a feature on 60 Minutes. CNN wants an exclusive, and there's a letter, hand-delivered by the way, from a senator's office asking if you'd testify in a hearing on equity in entrepreneurship." Still, Mason was quiet. Jordan finally sat across from him. "You good?" Mason looked over, his eyes tired but clear. "I'm just trying to figure out if I blew up my career or broke through a wall." Jordan tilted his head. "Maybe both." It wasn't just Mason who felt the ripple. At Cygnus Core, employees walked a little taller. They'd seen the clips too. For the first time, their boss wasn't just a name on the board. He was a voice, a force. Customers emailed support not to complain, but to say they were proud to use a product built by that man on the news who told the truth. But threats came too. An unmarked envelope arrived at the company's mailroom, no return address. Inside, a printed screenshot of Mason's face from the interview, with the words, "Too loud," scrawled in red across it. Security was tightened. Jordan brought in a private firm. Mason didn't argue. He'd lived enough to know what courage sometimes costs, but none of it made him second-guess what he said. If anything, the backlash confirmed it. This wasn't about feelings. This was about facts. About how America loves to celebrate Black excellence, as long as it doesn't speak too clearly or shine too brightly. As long as it doesn't look them in the eye and say, "The game was never fair. You just never noticed." The world had taken Mason's words and twisted them into 1,000 meanings. But deep down, he knew what mattered. He didn't go viral to be famous. He went viral because truth, spoken plainly and boldly, always forces people to choose, to wake up, to push back, or to stay silent. And silence was never his option. The meeting room was sleek, minimalist. Glass walls, polished concrete floors, a long walnut table that looked more like sculpture than furniture. Across from Mason sat 3 executives from a major streaming network. All of them were smiling, but only one had the kind of smile Mason trusted, the kind that didn't vanish when the camera stopped rolling. "We're offering full creative control," said the woman in the center, blonde, sharp-suited, early 40s. "We want to give you a platform, your voice, your terms." Mason tapped the edge of the table, thinking. They wanted him to host a new series, a deep dive into race, merit, and the American economy. Not just another podcast, not a shouty debate show. Something real. It was everything they hadn't offered him before the interview went viral. Jordan sat beside him, unreadable. He'd already vetted the contract. The terms were solid. "You don't have to say yes," Jordan murmured after the exec stepped out. Mason stared out the glass wall at the skyline. "They wouldn't be offering this if I'd played it safe." He remembered the moment in the interview, the silence after he asked, "Do you really think I got here because of some special advantage?" The moment the air had shifted and the truth filled the room like smoke. That truth didn't come from sound bites. It came from fire, earned through years of being underestimated, overlooked, and then suddenly watched. "I'll do it," Mason said at last. "But it's not just about telling stories. I want real conversations. I want people who've been kept out of boardrooms sitting at the table. I want to make it impossible to unsee what's broken." Jordan smiled. "Then we start rewriting the rules." That night, Mason sat alone in his office, the city glowing beneath the sky. A soft jazz track played low on the speakers, same playlist he'd listened to while coding the prototype for Cygnus Core years ago, back when it was just him, a busted laptop, and $20 left for dinner. He thought of his mother, a nurse who worked night shifts and still found time to quiz him on math homework. Of Mr. Harmon, the high school teacher who let him use the school computer lab on weekends. Of every mentor who believed in him. And of the dozens of classmates who'd been just as smart, just as driven, who didn't make it because the system swallowed them first. His viral moment wasn't just his. It belonged to every kid who ever had to be twice as good for half as much. To every Black entrepreneur who got asked which grant they applied for instead of which strategy they used. His inbox was still flooded. Some emails came from kids in Detroit and Dallas, from HBCU students thanking him for saying what we've been screaming into pillows for years. Some came from white executives, half supportive, half performative, and some were hate mail, plain, loud, and dangerous. But what they didn't know, Mason had built a career tuning out the noise and focusing on the signal. And the signal was clear now. The mic was his, not just for another viral clip, not for revenge, for change. 2 months later, The Merit Myth premiered on the streaming platform. Mason sat across from CEOs, community leaders, underfunded founders, and disillusioned former execs. No scripts, no filters, just honest, uncomfortable, necessary truth. In the first episode, he asked a simple question. If the system really rewards hard work, why do we keep making excuses for who it leaves behind? The show went viral again, but this time on Mason's terms. In a panel at MIT, a white venture capitalist who once dismissed DEI programs admitted the show made him rethink everything. In Brooklyn, a teenager wrote Mason a letter saying, "I didn't know someone like me could say all that and still win." And in corporate boardrooms across America, silence hung a little heavier after Mason Ellis spoke. Not because they feared him, but because they knew he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they were only there because someone needed a quota filled. Now they were there because they belonged. Because the bar? It never moved for Mason. He just leapt higher. And now, he was holding it up for the next generation to clear it too. What is the lesson of this story? 1. Success isn't always evidence that a system is fair. Just because one person climbs out of the fire doesn't mean the building isn't burning. Mason's story reminds us that individual success doesn't erase structural inequality. 2. The rules are not the same for everyone. While some can fail upward, others must be exceptional, just to be seen. Recognizing this disparity is the first step toward real change. Number 3. Your voice matters, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Truth has power. When Mason chose to speak up rather than stay silent, he sparked a national conversation. You don't have to go viral to make an impact, but you do have to speak up. Number 4. Challenge the narrative. Reclaim the story. Mason didn't just defend his place, he redefined it. Instead of accepting a role written for him, he wrote his own script. That's something we all have the power to do. If you've ever been underestimated, misunderstood, or told you didn't earn your place, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to help more untold truths reach the people who need to hear them most.